Hello there. I'd like to share an experience with you this afternoon about my time in East Timor, and I'd like to analyze it using the Cynefin framework. This is all about simple plastic water bottles. You wouldn't think there could be much learnt from that, but in fact it's a salutary lesson in everything. On this slide, I've called it an international own goal. And basically, what happened is this. In my province of Akusi, we had an excellent natural water source, some springs down on the lowlands along the coastal plain, and always, as long as people could remember, they had been drinking from these sources. Oxfam, who were the acknowledged experts in water and sanitation, came along and they said, this is one of the few places where we have no concerns about the purity of the water. We've tested it, we've looked at it. We're just going to start piping it along to the villages so that women don't have to walk so far to carry water back to their homes. This is a pretty simple setup. It seemed to me as the governor to be a win-win, a perfect situation, except it wasn't. We started to get pallets and pallets of plastic water bottles coming filled with drinking water for the internationals, not for the locals, but for the interveners. And at a meeting which I routinely held with all of them, I said, can you get hold of your headquarters and tell them to stop sending plastic bottles because garbage is starting to accumulate, piles and piles of empty plastic bottles. We don't need it. Oxfam have assured me, and they're here at this meeting, you talk to them as well, that the water source here in this particular part of the coast with this water source is absolutely clean and pure and they can drink it. And the Oxfam guy stood up and said, absolutely, very rare that we get such a good water source. We're just using there, and all we're doing is now putting in pipes and standpipes with spigots so that people can have a service close to their home in the middle of the village or wherever, so that they don't have to spend so much time gathering water. Back came from most of the headquarters, including the United Nations, no, we are not stopping sending plastic water bottles filled with drinking water because we have a blanket policy that we don't use local water. And this was absolutely heartbreaking. Gradually, the water bottles accumulated, the empty bottles accumulated and accumulated, until finally, in despair, I created for the first time ever a garbage dump in the province of Akusi. But the good news was that I could hire 4 locals to be keepers of the garbage dump. None of this garbage was theirs. All of this garbage belonged to the international community. It was an absolute own goal. In this photograph, you can see a cute little kid and several other kids behind him. And the majority of the garbage that you can see in this picture are plastic water bottles brought in for the international community, not for the locals. It was an absolute disgrace. So I had a garbage dump that was slowly filling up with plastic bottles. I had more bottles arriving. I couldn't get the international community representatives to turn off the arrival of these bottles. And so I started a little competition for the most creative use of a plastic bottle. Of course, we had the obvious ones, flower pots for seedlings, and people did that a lot. Even they found their way up into the hill villages to be used for the seedlings because it was much better. You could control the kind of shade they were in by taking a little pot into the shade. We had night lights, we had other containers, we had little sieves to sieve out seeds, and people really did try. We really did try to create a situation where we used this garbage, we tried to recycle, we tried to reuse. We still accumulated garbage at a terrifying rate. So the lessons learned from this particular experience using the Cynefin framework, so that in future you can see which practice belongs in which domain. Here is the slide. If you look at the obvious domain, you can see that we established a trash dump, paying for municipal workers. It was actually pretty straightforward. I had the power to do all of that, and therefore it was not a problem. If we look at the complicated domain, the humanitarian actors all had an idea about what to do with the plastic bottles once they were ordered by their headquarters to keep using them. They tried to help, they tried to reuse, they tried to recycle, but we were overtaken by the problem. And this is a classic example of the tyranny of experts. The complicated domain is the domain of experts. It's the domain of good practice, which means there's always more than one solution to the problem that you're facing. And the tyranny of experts simply means that the experts really do know better than anybody else, and they impose upon you a situation or a solution. They pick one. They are effectively saying there is best practice. And they were saying that best practice for drinking water for internationals was plastic bottled water. Simply not true in this case. And the inflexibility of the headquarters was the root cause of all of the problems. However, they were tyrannical and they were expert. If we look at the complex domain, we tried to use a safe to fail approach with lots of different ideas as to how to reuse, recycle these plastic bottles, and some of them worked. In this case, we were able to reward the people who could reuse and recycle the plastic bottles. However, as I understand it now, even now there is a problem 20 years later with the garbage dumps and the plastic bottles produced by the international community when they were there in great numbers. So finally, we get to the chaotic domain. And what I'd like to say about that is this. The chaos was an externally inflicted chaotic event. None of us could have foreseen this coming. Those of us in the international community didn't see it coming, and certainly the locals didn't see it coming. It was almost like for the locals, it was almost like a meteorite coming from outer space. All of a sudden, they had a problem because we were there trying to help them. It was a classic chaotic event, and we did our best to mitigate it. We did our best to get it into the other domains, but at no point did we ever really totally get on top of it. And the solution was really simple. Stop importing bottled water and start using the water that the local people were drinking, put in the pipes by Oxfam. Oxfam certified that it was good. It would all have worked. Sadly, tragically, it didn't. And that's the story of the plastic water bottles in Akusi.